All right, so God uses movements to bring about renewal in the church. The movement, let's call it charismatic renewal, and then baptism in the Holy Spirit, signs and wonders, deeds of power, that whole realm of charismatic gifting. Traditional Latin Mass as a movement of reverence and recovery of the sacrificial reality of living out our lives in Eucharistic ways that are utterly reverent. Where do you see the movement of God today as you're like around the church and looking around? Do you see the movement of charismatic renewal, signs and wonders, deeds of power, traditional Latin Mass, and a recovery of reverence in the Eucharist?
Well, I'm thanking God for both. I'm thanking God that there's a longing for reverent worship. I'm thanking God that there's a longing for beauty. I'm thanking God for what I see in a lot of folks who love the traditional Latin Mass, for a longing for community. The danger that I've seen a few times in that is that it can be very it's much more tempting there to build a ghetto. Archbishop Sample, I've heard him say on a number of occasions, the church has three options: we can capitulate, we can build a ghetto, or we can engage. And certainly a lot of people are capitulating. It's very tempting to build a ghetto right now. Just say, like, the hell with the world, like, keep them out. Which really comes from out of a sense of despair. Sometimes, like, we don't have a chance. Like, the world's too strong. Jesus is Lord, but apparently not that big of a Lord. Or we can engage. So again, I thank God for what I've seen in the TLM community. Another temptation there is simply, there are so many rites of worship within the Catholic Church that are all legitimate. And so anytime I think I have the right way and I lack charity, I'm in danger. Now, that can happen in the charismatic community too. I have a lot more experience in the charismatic community just because it was something I was familiar with in high school and in college and have continued to be in and out of. I can speak more from much more personal experience with that with regards to the dangers of it. I think the dangers there are simply, we can easily misunderstand that gifts are a sign of either God's approval or of holiness, when in fact gifts are just gifts. So someone came to, you mentioned Bishop Scene, and somebody came to him once and, was just kind of like fawning all over him and said, "Oh, you're such a holy man. You're such a holy man. I just love you." And he says, "What makes you think I'm holy?" And she says, "Because of the way you preach." And he says, "The way I preach doesn't tell you not whether or not I'm holy. The way I teach or the way I preach just tells you that God's given me a gift to preach. You'll find out whether or not I'm holy by watching me when I'm not preaching." And so we have a hard time, I think, oftentimes understanding how these gifts can be exercised and not be signs of authenticity of the person. But we need them both. We need right worship. We need beautiful worship. And we need to have the absolute confidence that Jesus is Lord and that he's sending us out into a world which desperately is longing for him, even though they don't acknowledge it. And with the power of the Spirit to go and do everything we can to rescue people.
Yeah. I want to explore this a little bit more in a couple of directions. So when you and I, again, in the late 80s into the 90s, were looking at efforts to renew the church and draw people into the church, it was very much in a situation of Christendom. And there was a sense of saying that we have to retain our identity, but also be relevant. So we have to be able to express worship in a way that was meaningful and could connect into the lives, right? So you had the youth minister who would use the jargon and dress like the, so identity and relevance. It feels like today that there's more of a shift to identity and reverence. So the shift from relevance to reverence, and especially in the Eucharist at the liturgy, that's going to, in fact, foster renewal, is if we recover reverence, because that is going to put us into the dimension of the divine, into the dimension of the holy. Okay, with that said, we live this really weird life out here where Carrie and I live, where Carrie goes to, I'll say this out loud, and we've said it before on the radio, Carrie goes to a Pentecostal church Sunday morning before Mass So she'll go to a Pentecostal church because they have the most amazing praise and worship, openness to the gifts of the Spirit, operating in the gifts of the Spirit. She then leaves, puts on her veil, and goes down to the traditional Latin Mass. And so this whole idea of charismatics, where there's this convergence between those that are baptized in the Holy Spirit, open to the Spirit, and those who are drawn to the greatest degree of reverence at Mass itself, that this sacred liturgy, it feels like the Lord is up to both, right? It's a both and we got to not look at each other as enemies, or as somehow God's doing what we're doing and God's not doing what you're doing. But somehow we've got to kind of let these two streams of renewal come together. I don't know. What's your thought on that?
Let me give you three thoughts. The first is, let me talk about movements in general real quick. I'm of the opinion personally that the parish is very important, to be clear. It's where we are nourished with the sacraments. It's, please God, where we are equipped for the work of ministry. I'm not sure that the parish is the future, the place of evangelization. I think that's actually the home. The United States is not Europe yet, and I don't know that we'll ever be Europe, but parish life in Europe, by and large, is not robust. Where you've seen growth in Europe is through movements. And so I think evangelization in movements, coming out of families, coming out of homes, is the place where the real work of transformation of the culture is going to be happening, I think. Having said that, I use the contrast between relevance and reverence. I might say, I think what's so needed is, rather than relevance, it's authenticity. Like, I want to see, I think people respond to vulnerability and they respond to authentic humanity, as opposed to when we try to be relevant. I'm clearly not who I am. I'm putting on a facade hoping that you will think I'm, like you, when in fact it's obvious that I'm not like you, right? But when someone can be authentically who they are, that's incredibly attractive, because again, that shows freedom, because that means you know who you are. And most people are struggling with their own identity. And so they're struggling with their own identity. They say freedom, and they're like, I want what you got. Mm-hmm. Then I think the last thing I'd say is, I've always thought, with regards to this, one of the guys on our team also, he splits his time. 1 week he's at a traditional Latin Mass. The other week he's leading worship at a Charismatic Catholic church. And I want to be like the owner of the storehouse, who's bringing out of the storehouse the new and the old. And the church is, for all of the attacks that the church gets for being rigid, the reality is you can't find anything that's more liberal in the right sense of the word than the Catholic Church. Like, you want to go to a traditional Latin Mass? Absolutely. You want to go down the street to the personal parish where they're exercising the spiritual gifts? Feel free. You want to be a Franciscan? Go for it. You want to be a Carthusian? Go for it. And our temptation, I don't think we handle, as people in general, and in Christians in particular, I don't think we really handle unity and diversity. I want, if I'm honest, I want unity and uniformity, mm-hmm. because I think I'm right. And if you were like me, you'd be doing what I'm doing. And I think we're always tempted to be in suspicion of those who aren't doing what we're doing. And there's 4 gospels, for gosh sakes, and they're different. And
yet they're one. I think that speaks to a lack of capacity to dialogue today, to really be open to the other and to speak the truth that we hold as precious, but in a way that's respectful to the other.